The call came into the police station on a Tuesday night in November. A boy's voice, trembling, describing a murder he could not have witnessed, because he had never seen anything in his entire life. "He's on the kitchen floor," the voice said, steady but fractured. "His head is by the sink. There's blood. I can smell it. I can hear it dripping." The dispatcher asked the obvious question, "How do you know what you're describing?" There was silence. Long, suffocating. "Because I was there," he whispered. This is the story of the Caldwell family. 4 generations of sons, all born blind. All living in a house where darkness was not merely the absence of light, it was the only language they knew. But one of them saw something, described something, witnessed something that should have been impossible. What follows is an account of what happened in that house in rural Vermont. It is a story about blindness and sight, truth and denial, and the terrible clarity that can exist in absolute darkness. The boy who called the police was 17 years old. His name was Michael Caldwell. His family had lived in the same house for 73 years. And on that November night, he described his brother's death with such vivid, impossible detail that the entire case would hinge on one single, haunting question. How could a blind boy see his brother die? What authorities discovered in the days that followed was far more disturbing than murder. It was a family secret so old, so carefully buried, that even the Caldwells themselves had stopped asking whether it was real. The blindness came without warning. In 1951, James Caldwell Jr. was born in a small farmhouse outside Montpelier. The doctors found nothing wrong until the boy was 3 days old. His eyes did not track light. They did not respond. Within weeks, it was confirmed: congenital blindness. Complete. Total. Incurable. The family accepted it. They adapted. They moved through their lives in the dark alongside their son. But when his younger brother, Thomas, was born 5 years later, the same thing happened. Blind. Total blindness. No medical explanation. Then came Richard in 1963. And then Michael in 2007. Every son. Every single son born to the Caldwell men was blind from birth. The pattern became so consistent that it transcended coincidence. Neighbors whispered about curses. Doctors debated genetics. The family simply lived with it, the way people live with things they cannot change. Blindness, for the Caldwells, was not a tragedy. It was an inheritance. The house itself seemed designed for darkness. Heavy curtains. No unnecessary lights. The sons learned to move through it like water through water, graceful, certain, without hesitation. They developed a language of sound, of touch, of presence, a way of existing that the seeing world could barely comprehend. James Caldwell Sr., the grandfather, had built the house in 1952 with his own hands. It was a sprawling Victorian, full of narrow hallways and unexpected corners. Perfect for people who could navigate by memory alone. The 3 blind sons grew up in it. They knew every board, every wall, every shadow. People in town stopped asking questions about the blindness. It was simply the Caldwell way. But what nobody understood, what the family itself seemed to have forgotten, was that the house held other secrets. Older secrets. Things that lived in its darkness long before the boys were born. James Caldwell III was 34 when his brothers still lived at home. He was the oldest. Born in 1951, he had lived his entire life in blindness, and in that darkness, he had built a careful, quiet existence. He worked remotely as a transcriptionist, converting audio files to text through headphones and a keyboard. The irony was not lost on anyone who knew him. The blind man who listened to the world and translated it into words. Thomas was 6 years younger. 28. He was different from James, more restless, more prone to anger. He had tried to leave the house multiple times. Tried college. Tried relationships. Each time, something pulled him back. The house, perhaps. Or the weight of the family's darkness. Michael was the youngest. 17. Born in 2007, he had never known the world before internet and screens and digital isolation. He had spent his entire adolescence in a bedroom surrounded by speakers and computers, navigating a digital world through sound and touch. He was intelligent, curious, and increasingly certain that something was wrong with his family. The three brothers communicated in a way that was almost telepathic. Years of living in the same small house had taught them to read each other through sound alone. They knew each other's breathing patterns, their footsteps, the way each moved through the darkness. But in the months leading up to November, something had shifted. Michael had begun asking questions. Questions about family history. About why every son was blind. About the house itself, its age, its previous owners, its secrets. James would answer vaguely. Thomas would grow irritated. But the questions kept coming. "There's something here," Michael said once. "In this house. Something that makes us sick." Neither brother argued with him. The three of them existed together in that darkness, but they were no longer the same. James was afraid. Thomas was angry. And Michael was becoming certain that the blindness they had inherited was not the family's real curse. The real curse was something else entirely. November 14th started as it always did. James woke at 6 in the morning. He moved through his morning routine by memory: shower, breakfast, coffee. The kitchen was the same as it had been for decades. Refrigerator in the corner. Sink on the west wall. Table in the center. Stove against the far side. Thomas did not come down for breakfast. This was not unusual. In recent weeks, Thomas had become nocturnal. He slept during the day and wandered the house at night, moving through its corridors like a restless ghost. James had stopped asking about it. Michael was in his room, the door closed, music playing quietly through his speakers. By evening, the house had settled into its familiar silence. James sat in the living room, a book, recorded as an audio file, playing through his headphones. He listened to words written by seeing people about a seeing world, and found in them a strange comfort. At 11:47 p.m., something shifted. It was subtle. A vibration in the floorboards. A sound that was not quite a sound, more like a sudden absence of sound. A moment where the house's ambient noise stopped entirely. James removed his headphones. The silence lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then a noise, sharp, sudden. A sound like something heavy falling. It echoed through the house from somewhere above, on the second floor. Where Thomas's room was. Where Michael's room was. James stood. He called out for his brothers. His voice echoed in the darkness. No response. He moved toward the stairs. His hand touched the banister. He began to climb. The house was absolutely silent now. The kind of silence that exists only after something terrible has happened. At the top of the stairs, James hesitated. He did not know what he would find. But he knew, with a certainty that lived in his bones, that the house had finally revealed what it had been keeping from them all along. When Michael called the police, he did not describe his brother's death. He described it with precision. "His head is by the sink," Michael told the dispatcher. "On the kitchen floor. His eyes are open. There's blood on the white tile. It's pooling near the cabinet beneath the sink, the one where Mom kept cleaning supplies." "Can you see him?" the dispatcher asked. "No," Michael said. "But I can see." This contradiction would haunt the case for months. When police arrived, they found exactly what Michael had described. Thomas Caldwell, age 28, lying on the kitchen floor with severe head trauma. His skull had been fractured. The autopsy would later determine that he had been struck repeatedly with a heavy object, possibly a cast-iron skillet hanging on the wall near the stove. But here was the impossibility: Michael was in his room when it happened. James insisted on this. Michael was upstairs, listening to music. "I heard him when I came down. His door opened. He came downstairs after I called for him." Michael corroborated this story. He had been in his room. He had not been present when Thomas was killed. Yet he described the scene with perfect accuracy. The positioning of the body. The location of the blood. The exact objects in the kitchen. Details he could not have known unless he was there. When police asked him how he knew these things, Michael's answer was strange. "I felt it," he said. "The moment it happened, I felt it. Like watching something through someone else's eyes." He paused. "Like Thomas was showing me." James offered a different explanation. He claimed that Michael had simply come downstairs, seen the body, and then called the police. That the timing was coincidence. That a blind boy, stumbling through a dark house, could have observed certain details about his murdered brother's position. But the medical examiner's report contradicted this. Thomas had been dead for at least 40 minutes when the police arrived. The body temperature was consistent with this timeline. Michael's statement came too quickly. He knew too much too soon. The detective in charge, a man named Robert Harrington, found himself staring at a contradiction he could not solve. A blind boy had witnessed a murder. A murder he could not have seen. The trial of James Caldwell III lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case was straightforward. James had killed his brother in a fit of rage, then manipulated his younger brother into corroborating a false story. The brothers were close. Michael would have protected him. The blindness was a convenient excuse, a way to make an impossible narrative seem even more unbelievable, thereby deflecting suspicion. The evidence was circumstantial. James had no alibi. There were no witnesses except Michael. No video footage. The house had no cameras. The murder weapon was recovered in James's bedroom. But the defense focused on one simple fact: Michael could not have been coached. He could not have seen the crime scene before his statement. His description was too accurate, too detailed, too immediate. This was where the case fractured. The judge was skeptical. The jury was confused. The town was divided. Some believed James was guilty and Michael was lying to protect him. Others believed the blindness somehow changed the rules of evidence entirely, that a blind boy existed outside normal logic. Religious people began attending the trial. They saw Michael's ability to see despite blindness as divine. Others saw it as demonic. Newspapers ran headlines asking, "Can the blind truly see?" The truth was simpler and more disturbing. Michael was telling what he believed to be the truth. He was not lying. But he was also not describing what he had witnessed with his own eyes, because he had no eyes with which to witness anything. What he was describing was something else. Something that came from somewhere else. The jury found James guilty. Insufficient evidence of alternative explanations, they claimed. But even as they convicted him, they seemed uncertain. The case had violated the natural laws of logic. A blind boy had seen. That should have been impossible. Yet it had happened. And nobody, not the police, not the judge, not the jury, could explain how Detective Robert Harrington did not close his file after the conviction. He had 30 years of investigative experience, and something about the case felt incomplete. He began requesting medical records. Not just for the 3 Caldwell brothers, but for their father. Their grandfather. The entire family history. What he discovered was a pattern that had never been documented in any medical literature. The blindness was real. Total congenital blindness affecting every male child in the direct line. The doctors confirmed this. But there was something else, something in the family's psychiatric history that had been carefully obscured. Beginning with James Caldwell Sr., the house's original builder, there were documented episodes of what the 1950s called nervous breakdowns. Reports of strange behavior. Delusions. One notebook entry from a 1957 psychiatrist described James Sr. as suffering from shared perceptual disturbances, a term that appeared in no subsequent medical records for his descendants. But then, in 1968, when Thomas was born, a different psychiatrist noted something unusual in her examination of the newborn James III. The child exhibits heightened sensitivity to ambient vibrations and electromagnetic fluctuations. Compensatory sensory adaptation appears to extend beyond typical neurological development. No follow-up study was ever conducted. Harrington found medical correspondence suggesting that the blindness, while genuinely present, might have triggered something else. Some kind of neurological adaptation that existed outside conventional understanding. One letter, dated 1984, mentioned shared consciousness between siblings and reported instances of perceptual overlap, but it was filed away without conclusion. The house's medical history contained a secret that the Caldwell family had been protecting for decades. The blindness was not the family curse. The curse was what came after it. A kind of connection between the blind brothers that the medical establishment could not explain or acknowledge. 3 years after his conviction, James Caldwell III requested a meeting with Detective Harrington. James sat in the prison interview room, His blind eyes pointed toward Harrington, and spoke for the first time about what had actually happened the night of his brother's death. "I didn't kill Thomas," James said. "But I was there when he died." Harrington listened. "The blindness," James continued, "it's not just about not seeing. It's about seeing differently. When we're together, Michael, Thomas, and me, we're not separate people. We're connected. Like three parts of one consciousness." He paused. "That night, I was in my room, reading. But I was also there. In the kitchen. I was with Thomas. I could feel what he was feeling. His anger. His terror. And then, the moment of impact. I felt it before it happened. I felt Thomas's last thoughts." Harrington asked, "Are you saying you knew he was going to die?" "I'm saying that when he died, I died with him," James said. "For a moment, we were the same person. And in that moment, Michael, upstairs, isolated in his room, he felt it too. He felt what we felt. He experienced our death. That's why he could describe the scene. He didn't see it. He was it." The confession was medically impossible. Psychologically implausible. But James spoke with such certainty that Harrington believed him, not necessarily in the literal truth, but in the emotional reality of what he was expressing. "The house," James said, "it was built on something. Grandfather knew it. We all know it. The blindness came to protect us. Or maybe it came because of it. I don't know anymore." He leaned forward. Michael asked the right questions. He could feel the wrong thing living in our darkness. And when Thomas died, the house showed us all what it really wanted. To see through us. To use our blindness to see what light cannot reveal. James was never released. His appeal was denied. And Michael was released after serving 2 years as an accessory to the crime, his conviction overturned on grounds of insufficient evidence. Michael Caldwell was released from prison on a Tuesday in October. He returned to the house. To the darkness. To the place where his brothers had lived and died. For 3 months, neighbors reported seeing him move through the house, or at least, hearing him. His footsteps. His voice, sometimes singing, sometimes speaking in words that made no sense. Sentences in languages that sounded familiar but weren't English. Then, in January, he disappeared. A welfare check was requested. Police found the house empty. Michael's room was undisturbed. His computers were running. His speakers played nothing. But he was gone. A search was conducted. Dogs, helicopters, dredging of the nearby river. Nothing. Some believed he had taken his own life, walked into the winter darkness and simply stopped walking. Others believed he had fled, unable to bear the weight of the house and what lived within it. But those closest to the case began to suspect something else. Michael had seen something his brothers could not. And in seeing it, he had become something else. A blind boy who could see murder. A boy who could feel his brothers' deaths. Perhaps, in the darkness of that house, he had finally seen clearly. The Caldwell house still stands in rural Vermont. It sits on its hill, quiet, dark, waiting. The local historical society attempted to designate it as a landmark, but the request was quietly denied. No explanation given. Years have passed. No one has lived there since Michael disappeared. The building has begun to decay, windows broken, walls weathered, darkness seeping outward like a living thing. Occasionally, someone brave enough will drive past at night. And every so often, someone will report seeing lights inside. Hearing voices. Or, strangest of all, feeling as though they were being watched by eyes that could not possibly see them. The case of Thomas Caldwell's murder remains officially closed. James Caldwell III died in prison in 2019. Michael Caldwell has never been found. But the question lingers, unanswered and unanswerable. What was the Caldwell family's real inheritance? Was it the blindness itself, or was the blindness simply a door, opened in darkness, that revealed something far older and far more terrible living behind it? And if blindness allows us to see what light cannot reveal, what was the house showing them all along?